So hopefully I said your name right. Is Kondelis?
Kondelis.
Kondelis. Okay.
You're close.
I said it wrong. But anyway, great to have you on. If you would go ahead and give a little bit of a introduction. Tell us a little bit about yourself, what your background is, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Butte, Montana. So I'm a
Oh, you're
Montana
in
kid.
my hometown.
Really?
Yeah, that's where I'm at right now.
No kidding. Yeah, I was born and raised there, lived there for 25 years, and then my wife and I moved to Wyoming in 2005. We had kind of both graduated. I was working, she was looking to get a job as a teacher, and so we kind of made a move down here, and we love it. It's been a great place. We're only 4 hours from home, so it's nice. But yeah, and then we got a daughter. She's a junior in high school, going to be a senior this year. So things are moving pretty fast, I guess. In terms of, they always say, don't blink, it'll be over before you know it. They'll be out of the house, and it's no joke. It goes pretty fast. But yeah, I'm actually I graduated from Montana Tech up there, business major, and kind of that was what I've done since graduation. Is just worked in business. We ran a business for a long time, my family, and then kind of have a couple of my own now. And the Bear Foundation stuff is all volunteer work. So started that up in 2007, I think, and just kind of do that, operate that as a volunteer. And the whole organization's all volunteer. And so between, the kiddo, couple companies and that, and then trying to be outdoors as much as I can, it keeps me pretty dang busy. So
For
that's
sure.
kind of a elevator pitch on me.
This episode of the Primitive Republic podcast is brought to you by 6 a.m. Outdoors. Ultralight gear built to go the distance. Whether you're chasing bugles in the backcountry or grinding out miles on a solo trek, 6 a.m. keeps your pack light and your mind focused. And with a lifetime guarantee, you're not just saving weight, you're saving money. Rugged, reliable, and ready, gear up at 6amoutdoors.com. That's www.viamoutdoors.com. Remember, adventure begins at 6 a.m. Yeah, well, you kind of caught my eye with the what was it, 360 Sportsman, one of your posts.
Oh yeah.
Um, you were talking about the Grizzly reintroduction and stuff like that, and that's one of the things that I'm really, really interested in. Just given my background and stuff like that, since you're from Butte. One of my buddies was just killed down there by immigrant
Oh
a few
gosh,
years back,
man,
and
I'm
I've
sorry.
had 4 friends that have been attacked by grizzlies overall.
Jeez.
Um, yeah, so it's one of those things. It's like um, beautiful creatures, but I got a love hate relationship for them, and a
Yep.
very, very healthy respect for them. So that's why I really wanted to bring you on here and talk about that and just bears in general.
For sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
the grizzly bear thing, good lord, you could probably do a 4-year college course on the beginning of introduction and the history of the grizzly bear up until now, and then just how complicated it's been, and how many how many things have happened since that time in the 70s they were listed, and to where we're at now. It's just it's an incredible success story as far as recovery goes. I don't think they were ever put on the list expecting to be recovered, to be honest with you.
Well, it's one of those things. It's really interesting to see how they don't, the pro grizzly recovery people, they don't look at it for the success that it is. It seems like
No.
they just look at it like, oh my god, you're taking it off the Endangered Species Act. And from my mind, I'm like, well, shoot, you got what, 2,000 bears in Montana now, give or take, and I think that's a hell of a success story.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it for what it is one of the greatest success stories in wildlife conservation ever. We took a species. I say we loosely because I was born in 1980. I was young for most of it. The people that were tasked with the recovery, which is a lot of the state agencies, recovered this thing to levels that we're even able to talk about it now like we are. And I think, I was talking to someone the other day about it. I said, I don't think they really drafted the putting them on the list. I think was supposed to be forever, because how many things get put on the endangered species list and actually recover? I think it's just where you go, like, we're going to protect you, and then it just the species dies off, and then we saw this turn and basically create this kind of weird anomaly with the endangered species list where a species actually recovered
Yeah.
to every level that they told us it needed to be recovered. And then now we're at this point where the guardrail just keeps moving. The goalpost moves, guardrail moves wider, and
For
so
real.
we're sitting in this I don't know, perpetual listing of the grizzly bear. Not for science or anything. It's all emotional based, now, because the people involved figured out, well, we can sue to keep it on the list, and that's the problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just
It's such a convoluted um, conversation, you know. It's kind of like wolves was, when they reintroduced wolves, they said, "Oh, well, it had to be at this level," and then they sued, and it's got to be at this level, and now they're trying to sue again, and it's just like, you know, I don't know. It's kind of crazy the way they keep moving the goalposts and stuff like that, and so what I'd like to talk about too is how they've been moving the goalposts. But if you could kind of give a little bit of history about the Grizz and what their range was throughout the West. Um,
yeah, for sure.
yeah.
Historically, and there's an actual story. I can't remember what book it is I was reading. It's Teddy Roosevelt, and pretty sure that's what it was. But he was talking about how they used to wrangle them on the plains. They'd like get some dudes on horses and they'd ride out there with ropes and rope them, and that's how they would kill them. Like, the bears lived on the plains, and there's, Lewis and Clark were seeing them all the way out in eastern Montana, and that's what they're built for. They're diggers and rooters. They're if you watch a grizzly bear out in an open meadow compared to a black bear, most of the time they're trying to dig and root, flip rocks. That's why they have that big structure in their front, that hump, and
Mm-hmm.
the big claws. They're diggers. And so they're built for the prairie and the flatlands and being out there, color wise, especially. As we kind of moved west and civilization did, it pushed them up. And then, they just became a product of the anti predator kind of parade that was going on in during the time of settlement of the West. Predators were bad. You got guys coming all the way out here trying to farm and ranch, and their livestock, and still today, their livestock and their farms are their livelihood. So we eradicated, didn't entirely eradicate, but we killed a lot of predators back in those days. Thankfully for black bears, they were able to get up in the forest. That's where they live. They do not like people, by and large. So they were able to kind of like hide and thrive. And grizzly bears were just like, this is where I live. I'm out here, and I think it just over time got to the point where it pushed them up in the mountains, and then they just weren't breeding, and their numbers declined so much that by 1976, I believe it was, they were so minimal that they got put on the endangered species list. And so, there's a lot of people still alive today that hunted grizzly bears in the lower 48. I bump into them, quite a few of the guys here in Cody that used to outfit,
Yep.
and they'd go shoot a horse up on a ridge somewhere in Cody country and bait a grizzly in. And so it was very much like black bears. We were, and in some states, I don't even know if you needed a tag for a lot of years. You could just hunt a bear with an elk tag or something. So I think we didn't realize early on that they were more probably like they were, I think, a little more vulnerable than a black bear is. Like if you look at the history of black bears since we've lived here, since people came to the United States on a boat, whatever, and then they infiltrated the East and West and the Midwest, and humans have exploded all over this continent essentially, and black bears are thriving, and they have since that day. They're that's why they're the coolest critter in my mind. But like all that has been done while there's been hunting, and so you see one species that can manage humanity a little bit better than another. And I think that's what happened with grizzly bears. And now we're at this point with them that essentially the bucket's full in all these recovery areas, especially the GYE and the NCDE, the Northern Continental Divide, where that's where they were tasked with recovering them, and they were supposed to recover them in those areas. And they did such a great job that the grizzly bears are so recovered, they're spilling out into all these fringe areas that was not deemed suitable habitat for them and was not in the Endangered Species Act, not part of the recovery area. And so as we move forward, we start seeing more conflict with bears. People are starting to hate grizzly bears more and more because they cause a lot of problems and they're dangerous. And so it's a weird thing where we're starting to see more and more people come out and say, well, they don't occupy but 4% of their natural range. And I'm like, okay, if you want them to occupy more of their natural range, you have to leave. Sell your house, go to another country, because we will never be able to see them be much bigger than that because we live in their space. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at now. I mean, that's a very broad brush look at kind of like the grizzly bear. And we can get into all the nuances and details of the different populations and everything, but yeah, that's kind of where we're at now with the grizzly bear.
Yeah. So you said a few things that are pretty noteworthy. So, one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is actually the black bear is a recovered species as well, even though it didn't get put on the ESA on the eastern side of the United States back when I can't remember if it was Daniel Boone or Davy Crockett, one of the two, but they were hunting bears just for the fat.
Crazy hunting down there. Yep.
Yeah. And I mean, they all but decimated all the black bears over in that neck of the woods, And so now you look at the black bears over there in Tennessee and all along the eastern states, and I mean, they're freaking everywhere. North Carolina is known for some of the biggest bears on the East Coast, North Carolina, Pennsylvania.
In this country. I mean, and that's a testament to hunting and management. Like it became a thing where it was like, we got to do something about it. And this is what I always say about the grizzly bear. If you want to ensure that grizzly bear never reaches the levels it did before, you need to create hunter advocates for it. Because there's no hunter advocates for the grizzly bear right now. But every other species that has an advocacy group or hunters behind it are thriving. Pretty much. Yep. We have issues with mule deer and sheep, whatever. But by and large, like, we're doing everything we can to ensure those species are successful on the landscape because we enjoy pursuing them. Now, if you day one created some hunting seasons for grizzly bears, you're going to have a handful of people to start that are going to be like, man, I love grizzly bears now because I can hunt them, or I'm going to get a chance one day. And so they're going to be advocates for the species. That's what they're lacking right now. They don't have that. The only advocates for them don't live around them. Right. For the most
You've got to create an intrinsic value around everything, or people just don't care about them. I mean, there's got to be a value to it. So one of the other things that you said that I thought was pretty noteworthy was when you were talking about the greater Yellowstone ecosystem or the Northern Continental Divide ecosystem. That is really noteworthy because of the latest lawsuits that came out even though they were only supposed to be recovered in those areas. Now they're using that as a metric to keep them on the endangered species list because you're not getting genetic diversity, or
Mm-hmm.
so they're saying, even though I did a video a while back that shows that that's a load of crap
Yes.
because I mean, if you look at where all these bears have been spotted, male and female, because they track them, Montana tracks them by male and female, they're overlapping, and
Oh
it
yeah.
looks like chicken pox all over the state.
Yep.
So let's get into, so what was the reasoning for it? So they were delisted a couple times. So
Yeah.
what were the reasonings for them being delisted the first time?
Well, they were, and just more recently, they were delisted based on you had to hit these metrics, recovery criterion they're called, and I don't have them in front of me, so but there were like three metrics. One was like sows with cubs in a certain area, breeding sows, and mortality was a big thing. And in the GYE, they've met that recovery criteria for like forever. Multiple 10 years, 15 years, something like that. So that was what was brought forth initially. And the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, who mandates kind of this whole thing, they were just like, yeah, there's a recovered population based on the criteria that was put forth prior to all this happening. Like if you have this many bears and you do all these counts, and they have all these statistics that they use and algorithms to count X amount of bears, and it extrapolates it out, and they fly, and they're one of the most researched species on the planet. And they just said, everything was done. You're over this amount of bears. So yeah, you're delisted, and so the GYE was first. And then, what ended up happening was each state, Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming, had to have a management plan. And in those management plans, because the state would start managing them as their own, they could do hunting seasons. And it was very, very contentious. We had a lot of people that were pro delist, didn't want hunting seasons. We kind of came out, we're like, let's just delist it first and go from there. Like, let's not race into hunting. We didn't want hunting to be like the really bright light of the whole thing. We wanted it to be kind of like, yeah, we're delisting the bear, and then kind of, yeah, we might be able to hunt them through these management plans. And the three states had an MOU which would allow for X amount of harvest each year based on the previous year's mortality.
And
And it
what's
was
an MOU?
a memorandum of understanding.
Okay.
And so there was an agreement between the three states around the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming, that just said, okay, you have 10% of the GYE in your state, Idaho. I don't know if that's the real number or not. So you get 10% of the allowed mortality. And Montana, you have 25%, you get 25%. Now, Wyoming has most of the GYE, so they got the majority of the allowed mortality through hunting. And so the hunting season was going to be kind of like, okay, you can hunt X amount of bears in the demographic monitoring area, which is the recovery zone. And those bears, the number was based off of mortality from previous years. That's total mortality, counting cars, management removals, all that stuff. They said, we can sustain this much mortality. Only X amount can come from hunting. And so each year it was going to change based on how many bears got put down for getting into garbage, or how many bears accidentally got shot. Each year it was going to change, and you'd get tags allocated based off the percentage of the GYE that you had. And then Wyoming took it a step further, which I applauded, because this is where we have our issues, is they were going to issue a bunch of tags outside of the recovery area. Bears that are not part of the recovery, they're now moved out of the recovery area into space that is almost not suitable habitat. They said, we're going to give out like 20 tags in those areas. And so the hunting season was pretty well set until, we were down to the wire days. It might have even been the day before. And the judge in Missoula, Judge Christensen, he stopped the hunt and basically said, wait, we can't do any. Now, mind you, they've had 8 months to work on all this, but they waited till the day before to stop the hunt. And then they went and he ruled that, well, you got to do this, which demographic or the population or the, gosh dang it, the demographics had to be more diverse. You had to have DNA transfer between distinct population segments. So GYE bears had to be breeding with Northern Continental Divide bears, and there was a couple other things that needed to be changed. And
Well,
so then fast
wasn't
forward.
there
Go ahead.
one? This episode is also brought to you by Invader Concepts, the Montana-made holster company that don't mess around. Built by hand, battle-tested, and backed by a no BS lifetime guarantee. These rigs are purpose-built for backcountry hunters and everyday carriers alike. I trust their Recon chest rig on every wilderness trip, and their Outlaw and standard in the waist belt and out of the waist belt holsters keep me locked and loaded day to day. Quiet Ride Tech means all-day comfort, no clatter. These are the last holsters that you will ever need to buy. Head over to Invader Concepts and use promo code TPR to knock 10% off of your order. Oh, sorry. Wasn't there something in there? It had to be a sustainable species. I remember reading that somewhere. It had to be a sustainable species. And there was something going on with a food source. I want to say it had to do with like a pine nut or something like that.
Yep.
And they were saying, well, that makes up, I want to say it was 10% of their food source. So it could technically end up killing more bears because they could be starving to death and it wouldn't be considered a viable species or something like that.
That was the white bark pine, which was a big issue, even before this last delisting effort, which was like gosh dang, now it's probably been 7 or 8 years that the last time. Prior to that, the white bark pine was kind of identified as one of their key food sources, and that grows at high elevation, kind of like the last trees at tree line are white bark pine in a lot of places, and their nut, their pine cone essentially was a huge food source for grizzly bears. Well, as those trees have started to slowly like kind of get old and die, there's been no new ones. It's climate, all these different factors why the white. So that was one of the main reasons early on why they said, well, you can't delist them because their food source is so low. That's all they eat is white bark pine. And then you fast forward a few years, and they did some remarkable research. They're like, well, bears are opportunistic omnivores. Like they'll find food. They're not going to starve to death because a pine cone's not on the ground. Like they'll just find something else. Well, they started identifying these moss sites at high elevation up in the cliffs and rocks and shale on top of these peaks that
the
bears were
Shoshone Moth
congregating.
Project or something like that, right?
Yeah. And so we have a ton of them around Cody where bears kind of were like, okay, we don't care about white bark pine anymore. I'm sure they still use it, but like now we go to moss sites, and it's like a pilgrimage of grizzly bears to these moss sites in the summer, and they go up way high at elevation and they just eat these army cutworm moss, and I think they're like 100 calories per, and they just eat on a ton of those until that's over, and then they're back down low into berries. And so they kind of dispelled that whole thing with the white bark pine. They're like, oh, they don't need that. Here's, and actually on Frank's Peak right outside of Cody recently, I think last year, they counted over 100 of them up there on the moss sites.
Holy cow.
Yeah. So like they're really congregating. And so now it's become learned behavior. Mothers are teaching their cubs. Cubs are now passing that on to their cubs. And so it's become a thing that's generational now with bears. And so the white bark pine thing is it's a non-issue now. But it just goes to show like they'll pick anything they can to try and, further their narrative or their I guess their agenda.
Yeah. And so man, there's so much to unpack with this whole situation because so one question I had too, why is a judge in Missoula the one that's the arbiter over an area that is mostly in Wyoming? Because there are two district courts. Am I mistaken that? Because I think Wyoming is 10th district and Montana's 9th district, isn't it?
Yeah, and so that was 9th district, and the people that brought forth the suit, you can pick your court, I believe, is why they did that. So the 9th district is traditionally pretty favorable to some of these conservation, I'll call them preservation groups, And so I believe that was the intent, is they knew they would have a favorable outcome picking that court system and that judge.
Yeah.
And so there again, why are we dealing with wildlife management in a court? That guy didn't go to school to be a biologist. There's dudes and there's guys and gals that made their entire career as a bear biologist recovering grizzly bears. Like I'd rather listen to them than Judge Christensen in Missoula, who,
Well, even a lot of biologists. I was at the BHA rendezvous this last weekend. Talked to 2 biologists that were there, and they even admit they're fully recovered.
Oh yeah.
Now they're a little bit salty because apparently this administration on a federal level is killing all grizzly bear research that'll be funded by the Fed.
Now I hadn't heard that, but I can see it.
Yeah, so both of these biologists actually confirmed that, and they named off all the different ones. I don't remember exactly what it is. I think I've got a note in my phone where I can look at all that stuff. But they had also told me about the Shoshone Moth Project, which I think was pretty cool. I wanted to find somebody to talk about all that kind of stuff too, because I think that's pretty interesting.
It's fascinating. I'm lucky enough to know one of the large carnivore director here in Wyoming has been involved with that heavily, and some of the pictures and videos that he's been able to capture and they're actually starting to collar bears on those moth sites. They're able to fly now and locate abundance of bears. That's the hard thing with bears. We can't count them. A lot of times they're in the forest, and they don't winter on a winter range. So that's how we count deer and elk and antelope. Bears are in their den. And so they're using these moth sites to be able to count bears, collar bears. And that's, it's a pretty remarkable thing. You can hike up to the location and stay back and glass them and use your spotter and see them up there. And there's multiple ones all over in our area and in the kind of I'd say the eastern, the Absarokas and Beartooths. There's some moth sites, and those bears congregate, and that's been one of their things. And so, there's a lot of stuff we're still learning about bears, which is shocking because, like I said, grizzly bears are about one of the most studied species on the planet. And, every summer still the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the IGBC, is still trapping and collaring grizzly bears, in summer research projects that they're doing. And so I think there's a bunch of people that are kind of fed up with okay, we've studied these things enough. I can count, how many I saw this spring bear hunting. I'm like, geez, that's just what I saw. I don't think you need to know much more than come hang out with some people that live in the area for a day or two, and you're going to find out that they're not endangered.
Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. I mean, we usually about once a year, I'm seeing them, but I'm starting to see them in places that they weren't normally there. I've seen them in the crazies now. I've seen them in the big belts. I've seen them over in the Beaverhead. Actually, the pinned video that I have on my TikTok was over in the Beaver, right outside of Bannock.
Yep.
And they're definitely in those transition zones between the ecosystems. And then I just saw a video, what was it, 2 days ago or something like that? A gal was showing them, all the people were posting, they're like, oh, that must be outside of Shoto. And she's like, nope, that I can't remember where she said it was, but
was that the one in the Bears Paws? They just had a issue in the Bears Paws. Yep.
Yeah. And, so they had the ones in the Snowies, which is an isolated mountain range. The Crazies are isolated mountain ranges. So, unless Fish and Wildlife is dropping those bears in those isolated mountain ranges, which they're not supposed to be, from what I understand,
Oh,
those bears are traveling.
yep. Yeah, those bears are moving. That's one thing that they're pretty. I mean, it's pretty contentious because we just went through this in Washington where they want to augment that um, northern Cascade uh, grizzly bear population, and there was a big fight over that. Like, they're not just picking bears and moving them to random places, and those places are outside of the GYE, the NCDE. You get into Idaho, you got the Bitterroot, you got the Yak in Montana and stuff,
Selway,
but
yep.
yeah, they just travel. Like, they're looking for places. There's so many bears in some of these areas that aren't being managed now, that like, and grizzly bear boars are super dominant, like killing cubs, territorial. So like a subadult male is not going to hang out in the same area as a big dominant 12-year-old grizzly bear boar. He's going to seek out to find a new place to live, and that's why we're seeing this. And they can travel crazy distances, and they feel at home, I think, out in the open, and so yeah, we're going to just continue to see. When I grew up hunting the big hole, gosh, you never dreamed in a million years.
Yeah.
I mean, I hunted there for 25 years. Well, I started hunting there when I was 12, 11, 10, in that area with my family, and hunted all the way. And I've been back, and it's those days where you would never even dream of seeing a grizzly bear or even talking about grizzly bears. And now,
Yeah.
you got people seeing them in the big hole. So it's good habitat for bears. But that whole population connection thing is, I'm with you. I've seen the collar data showing bears coming out of the NCDE all the way down to Butte, and bears pushing all the way up from the GYE into the Ruby, and it's just like, dude, there's no way they're not going to be
Yeah.
interconnected,
We
and
just
then,
had a sow. I think it was a sow last year that they called because they kept getting into people's trash over in Elk Park.
yeah. And part of the recovery after Judge Christensen came in and side railed that whole thing, part of the deal was they had to relocate bears from the GYE into the NCDE and vice versa to
Yeah.
create this diverse DNA, and they did it. And so that was a big thing, like moving bears from different population segments into different states to make the whole thing work. The states did everything, and it took about 3 years and several petitions for them to even look at the three states petitioned the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service a while ago. Said, we did all the stuff we're supposed to do. Here's we think they're delisted. We did everything you're supposed to do. Now we need you to review it. Let's delist them and move forward. And they sat on it forever until right before the election. They came out and said, not only do we see your petition, but we basically are throwing it out the window, and we're going to make it impossible to delist grizzly bears with these new guidelines. This is the new touchdown, and it is,
So what are those? What is the new guidelines?
well, pretty much opened it up to being like Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming, Washington, Oregon. Like, they added just everywhere. They said you have to have recovered populations in all these areas, and it's not distinct anymore. So they just want like a broad, big map of the Northwest Rockies to have grizzly bears, and you have to have genetic diversity. The map, the recovery areas have just exploded into, they're all like combined now, and that was a new thing that they're just like, well, if we do this, they can never do it because there's too many humans on the landscape to allow for this. And so that was just their way to be like, no, we ain't doing it. We're gonna make it so hard to recover them that you just, and people will give up. They'll quit on them.
So are there any are there any ways for us to push to have it brought back and have that whole thing basically tossed out?
Well,
Or was that like an executive order by the president, or how does that
no. So the
affect?
U.S. Yeah. So thankfully, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the head of it is an appointee by the president, and so very much so they kind of I think it is their temperature on subjects dictate how the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service handles things. And so we had an administration that was kind of not for delisting, and one of their last things leaving was, well, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and its director deemed this bear not recovered, and you have to do this now. Well, it wasn't a month or two later, a few months later after the election, they had a comment period open for that new regulations and listing, grizzly bear kind of plan. And it was getting down to the wire where comments were going to be shut off. And the Trump administration came in and said, like, no, we're not doing that. Just put everything on hold for right now. Let's so they kind of stopped it all and put it on hold, because he's appointing, well, he is trying to get Brian Nesvik, the former director of the Wyoming Game and Fish, as the director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So he still has to go through all his, hearings and everything. And so, with the new administration comes new people, a new mindset. And so basically, I don't think they're going to come right out and go, yep, grizzly bears are delisted. Let's roll and go ahead and hunt them. But I think it's a better environment to get some sort of delisting done. Now, unfortunately, the next administration can come in 4 years and depending on what happens. So the biggest thing I think that we need to look at is not like, oh, we got to petition the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We have to get some legislation, and we have to get lawmakers in D.C. to change the way the Endangered Species Act is, to get the grizzly bears to just fall off. Because you can't, as far as I know, you can't litigate something like that in a court. If the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in its new direction comes out tomorrow and says grizzly bears are delisted, it's going right to, I guarantee you, in a day it's in court.
Oh,
and
sure.
So, but if they come out and they have the ability to do it, and they say, well, because of the new law we enacted, or we amended the Endangered Species Act for this, or whatever they need to do, but I think it has to happen there, not by the service, because that'll just get litigated.
That's crazy. So it's weird that they're playing so many dangerous games, and I say dangerous games because of the human wildlife conflicts. Like, you guys down there, you had, what was it, the 3 wrestlers that literally wrestled a freaking grizzly bear.
Yep.
And then we've had, I think I saw a video not long ago by one of the nature companies. I don't remember what it was, but it was saying that Montana had, and I need to check on this stat, but they said Montana had 50 registered attacks by grizzlies in the last 20 years. And most of those attacks have been within the last 10 years.
It's getting much worse.
For real. Yeah.
I mean, I think that part of the problem is, as grizzly bears have moved into new areas, we're seeing a couple things. Like, I was at one of the talks by one of the biologists that was involved with, the IGBC, and a great bear biologist that I respect tremendously. And he had mentioned, like, reproductive rates for grizzly bears are declining because they're starting to figure out there's too many of us, and it's nature's way of slowing down, because the cubs are all getting killed and everything. And so the sows they're not breeding as much as they were, the boars aren't. And so it was like nature's way of controlling it. But what's offsetting that is this push of the bears out into new areas. And I think these new areas are where we have the most conflict, because people are not used to living and being around grizzly bears. Like, if you come to Cody and talk to anyone, it's like, yeah, dude, 25 years I've been dealing with these things. It's no big deal. Now, if you go to Shoto and Augusta, it's not that new. I mean, they've been dealing with them for a while, but it's like, it's newer than in a lot of areas. And then you look at Dillon and some of these places where that's a new thing in some of these areas. And so people just aren't used to dealing with it. The amount of money that gets spent on just conflict mitigation in a lot of these areas have no infrastructure for it. And so that's where we're seeing a lot of problems because, it's, I'm seeing bears that have zero fear of human beings, like walk right up to your truck like you're in Yellowstone.
Yeah.
I mean, it's insane to me that's, I mean, if you've hunted Alaska, you know the difference. And it's just like, yeah, we have a population of bears that are, and we're not doing them any service. Like I can't imagine being a bear that has to live off of garbage because, I can't make it somewhere else. And there's just too
Right.
many of them, plain and
Yeah.
simple.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned Shoto. There was, what was it, last year or the year before? There was a guy, he had a grizzly in his hay barn and it came out and actually attacked him. And
Yeah.
then there was another one. It was a big freaking boar that like came out and came at his truck. He was driving a little Ford Ranger, and
Yeah.
I mean, it just absolutely, that thing was a
They're,
freaking monster.
yeah. I mean, you just are going to continue to see it too. The way we're going, the direction we are heading, it's going to cost more taxpayer dollars to manage them because the states pay most of the money to manage the grizzly bear. Not a lot of people know that. They think, well, they're federally protected, so the feds pay for it all. No, you do in your state.
Yep.
And most of the people that are doing the work are state level officials with the agency, whether it's the Game and Fish or FWP, whatever. So it's all this pressure on these states to manage a species that they don't get a control how it is managed, but they're mandated, like you will do this and you will do this, and so it costs a ton of money. And then you have all the other NGOs and groups that are paying money to try and like make it a little bit more livable. You got predator boards having to shell out thousands and thousands of dollars for livestock loss. You got us, thousands of dollars over the years, to put up electric fences and bear proof garbage just to keep people safe. Like,
Yeah.
you know,
Well, and one of the big things that's not talked about a lot, or hardly at all, is the amount of bears that are culled every single year. Like,
yep.
and they, a lot of these guys, like, they're paid to go around and shoot bears. And I was talking to someone, I'm not going to mention any names, and I don't even really want to say where he's from, because if I do, maybe they could track him down. But um, he said he knew a few of the people that are actually tasked and contracted with going out and killing problem bears and stuff like that. And he was helping pack one of those bears out for him. And he goes, "How many times do you guys do this?" And he goes, each one of us is probably around 30 a year.
Yeah. It's a huge amount of waste. Like if we can manage, if we allow that much mortality and we can sustain that much mortality, but the numbers are growing and the population's expanding into new areas, like that just shows you, like if Wyoming can kill X amount of bears every year through management, and Idaho can, and Montana can, and the population doesn't decrease and it keeps going up, and bears are found in new areas. It's just, I mean, the writing's on the wall. It's easy to see. Like, okay, if they can sustain this yearly, then we must be at a level that we don't even know. Like guys go out every year and they see them, and so I saw over 35 this spring bear hunting. And that's just the
Jeez.
ones I saw. And so,
Do
and
you
I hunt.
think do you think they're being honest about the numbers? Because I hear that all the time. People who live up in Sioux Falls or Shoto, or down in Gardner, or wherever, where they're Ennis. Ennis is a big one. I hunt the
Yeah.
Madison a lot. Um, you know, they everybody is like, I really don't think that they're telling us the truth about the number of bears. And I saw one report, and it wasn't by FWP, it was by another organization that was saying currently that there are only 800 bears in the state of Montana.
Yeah,
And
it's no different than our media. Like it depends on who you talk to. And any NGO that has got an agenda is going to say there's more bears or there's less bears to further their agenda and their cause and raise money for their organization. I don't think that the state agencies are falsifying the numbers. I'd almost guarantee that the state agencies aren't, because I think everyone I've talked to and most of the state agencies are like us. They're like, yeah, dude. I think what ends up happening is they're a product of the science and the math that is being used. So, part of the way they count bears is they go and they count X amount of bears and then they pop it into an algorithm and then it's like, okay, it spits it out. This is how many you should have, because we can't go out and count every bear. The only way to really get close would be to do like hair traps and DNA traps. So you're putting barbed wire out all over the landscape, trying to collect individual DNA. And it's just super time consuming and cost prohibitive. So what they do is they trap bears in the summer. They put a collar on them, they work them up, and then they let them go. And then they're doing flights, in the summer and trying to count them. But like, you're not seeing every bear. Like I said, it's not like counting elk on the winter range out on Fleecer or, down in the gravelies when they winter. So you just don't know. And so then they have to rely on a method to try and get a close count. And they use this method. If you want to really get into the weeds on it, you can look it up. They have these population algorithms and models that they use. So
yeah, and
it's
they do the
not,
same thing for elk and deer and stuff
yeah.
like that too.
So it's not real data as terms of like individual bears counted. And so there's no way that it can show how many bears are really there. Like we'll never know. It's an estimate. I think where there are some people that live and die by that estimate. And then there's realists like people like us that live on the landscape that are like, okay, if I saw this many bears in this drainage, why don't you extrapolate that out and say how many are in every drainage around here? You're going to be well over
Well, to be
what
able
the
to see
estimates are.
35 grizzlies, like let's put this in perspective. I don't know how big Wyoming is by square miles, but the areas that grizzlies are is less than half of the state,
What? Yeah. Yeah.
and way less than half the state. Um, you're talking about one major mountain range that runs through there, and that's pretty much where they're at, right? So if you've got that many bears in the state of Wyoming and you were able to see 35 within a spring bear season, that's astronomical. I
Yeah.
mean,
It was.
that's huge.
I tell you where it really gets frustrating. It was one of the reasons we even kind of spun the Bear Foundation up, was like, as being a diehard bear hunter, like that's my thing. And I'd go out in the spring and I'm like, man, most years I'm 7 or 8 to 1, grizzly to black. And I'm just like, there's no way that the numbers that are being told to us are real. Because to me, I'm seeing X amount every year. And this is the worst year I've ever had, where I was just like, I couldn't get away from the damn things. I was like a magnet. But you're covering a ton of country, hunting, hiking, packing in. We hunt mostly Northwest Wyoming. And so, like you said, it's not a giant area. And most of these bears were not repeat counts, just because I know where I was hunting and being able to kind of identify them, got them all on film and video. It's just like, if there's that many, and then you talk to other bear hunters that are like, I saw 3 black bears this year, I saw 20 grizzlies. It's like, okay, in a normal world, you'd go out and see maybe 20 black bears and 3 grizzlies. Like,
Yeah.
then if you told me that the numbers were this, I'd probably believe you. But when I do the opposite, and that frustrates me, because we have zero idea how many black bears live in some of our grizzly bear use areas. And I'm like, there ain't many.
Well, and grizzlies are they thrash black bears.
Oh, it's just they're tough on them. It's a I don't blame the grizzly bear. It's just that's what they are, and you get enough of those around. And in some of our areas, we're not Alaska, we don't have the abundance of resources that Alaska does, where, one drainage can't sustain 5 bears. And so who's going to be the one on the backside? It's the black bear or the small grizz. And those are the ones that usually get in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty crazy. Well, when you're talking about um, what these bear or like what a draw could sustain, do you know how many acres? I guess I'm kind of comparing it to maybe cattle or something like that, but do you know how many acres it takes to sustain a grizzly?
I do not know the specifics of that. I think, based off of like what they did with the recovery areas, and how they kind of outlined them early on. They need space. Bears do. I know when it comes to black bears, a boar could have a 40-mile square home range. And so if they're overlapping so much and traveling, and then you have sows and cubs, so I don't really know like what the required square footage or acreage is for sustainability. It's the hard thing
Well, I
is
want to.
like we're counting. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I want to say that the, I go to the grizzly encounter down there in
Oh yeah.
Livingston every now and then, right? And I want to say they said that a male grizzly needs 20 to 30,000 calories a day or a week. Either way, it's a pretty astronomical amount in order to get ready um, for hibernation. And then a female is about half of that.
Yeah.
It's
So that's a lot of traveling for food. I mean, it's just, it's a hard thing where we live, because not only do you have, it's a toothy area. I always say it's like we got grizz, black bears, cats, wolves, coyotes. And so, bears, thankfully, and to their benefit, don't need meat to live. They can eat other things where cats can't. They won't, and wolves don't. So it's like, okay, they can thrive in some areas where meat is not 100% of their diet, but they still need a lot of food. And so the grizzly bears no different than black bears do in Montana and Washington, when a food source is hot, like berries or something. I mean, they just congregate around it so much. And it's a really crazy thing to see, when you can go into I can drive up the North Fork and see more grizzly bears than I can see moose. And I can drive up the North Fork and maybe never see a black bear, but easily probably see a grizzly bear a day on average. And so
jeez.
it's like when they're that common, and that's just on roads and trails, and that's why I think I see so many, is because I'm off of the beaten path when I'm bear hunting a lot. I'm not seeing the ones that are down on the roads and on the fringe. I'm seeing some of the ones that are out and about, kind of backcountry. And so it's just it sometimes takes more people. Unfortunately, the people that are making the decision right now aren't people that have the same experience as we do.
Yeah. So there's a lot going on right now with public lands, and, they're looking at selling off public lands, trading off public lands, all that kind of stuff. And I'm not necessarily saying that all public land trades or sales are bad or good. But what are we looking at as far as the recovery goes, and issues with bear populations and stuff like that, with those public lands being
Yeah, I
divvied
haven't
off?
really thought about that too much. I guess it depends on what they do with the land if it does get sold. Is that land then sold to someone to get developed?
Apparently
Um,
they're talking about it's for uh, affordable. Well, it's always under the guise of affordable housing. I don't trust
yeah,
that, but housing is the
yeah.
main things that they're.
I just don't understand some of it, because I looked at the map and they have places where I hunt and stuff that are on there, and I'm like, dude, you can't. you're not gonna build houses. Like you're 50 miles out of town, up in the wilderness almost. It's like, what are you gonna do? Build a condo here? Like I don't. I guess I don't understand some of the selection of the land. Probably not good enough to make too many comments on it. But I know, like, development on a large scale will make it harder for us to delist a grizzly bear, because that is a big thing with the preservation groups is timber and mines and all that stuff. They're always suing these timber companies and mining companies to try and stop them from doing what they do because of grizzly bear habitat. And so, you know, they're going to use the grizzly bear as their crutch as long as they can, no matter what.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things that people just don't seem to understand, and I like, it's like beating my head against a wall, is trying to get some of these people to understand that the wild just can't be left alone anymore.
No.
What's your perspective on all that? Like, what are your, do you deal with that a lot? Like trying to explain that to people, or, and
Yeah.
if you do, like, how do you explain that?
It's a huge thing. People are always like, well, you know, it's Mother Nature, just leave it alone. I was like, we can't. You're here. We're here. I'm here right now. And that requires us to manage wildlife. Now, if we were gone tomorrow, they'd figure it out. Wildlife wouldn't care. I mean, the earth would not stop if humans disappeared tomorrow. We think it would. That's the human nature, you know, like, oh, if I'm not here, everything's gonna, we won't know how to, wildlife won't know how to manage itself. It's like I always say, humans just ruin everything. Like we meddle in too much stuff. Um, but we have a responsibility because we are here to manage wildlife. And that's because we live, and I said this in that video, like we live on the fringe. So we live in their habitat and we live where they used to live and we go into their spaces and wild places. And if we want to continue doing that, then we have to take the tough pill and swallow it and say, well, we got to manage them because we all can't coexist. It's not a perfect world. Like there can be wildlife on the landscape, which we all want. And there can be humans on the landscape, which we all want. But those two cannot coexist without wildlife management. It just won't work.
And what are the things that keep that from happening?
Well, this delisting thing, you know, the grizzly bear being on the endangered species list does not allow the states to manage them for not only, you know, safety, but you know, sustainability. Really, like the states were going to manage them to a level that they were never going to get back to the levels they were before. People were going to be able to utilize the resource through hunting, food, whatever, and you were going to give people the opportunity to have a say in management. And I think that's what they want. You know, like I think the humans, us as humans, just when we live around all these things all the time, we would like to have an opportunity to be involved in the decisions made with how they're managed. And we don't get that right now. And so I think that's a big part of it. You know, like you can go to elk meetings, deer meetings, you can do all that. You can go complain. Now, maybe no one's listening, but you have an opportunity to have a say in the way wildlife is managed for almost every species, at least out west, that we're interested in. Maybe things that we hunt that we need to you know, sustain our families, whatever. But we don't get that with the grizzly bear, and I think that frustrates people tremendously.
Yeah. Well, I guess my question was though, like what are the things, what are the reasons that people and bears, well, people, I would say predators, not just bears, can't completely coexist just in the wild? It would be one thing in my mind if we just said, okay, we're going to manage everything to include human population. Um, that would be one thing, right? Now, I'm not at all advocating that we go out and start managing human populations. That's not what I'm saying. But if humans are the only population or species, well, the only species on the planet that I'm aware of that is not managed in some form or facet.
Mm-hmm.
And So either you have to take this approach that now we deal with the fact that we are going to be overlapping into their habitats because we're not managing our population. So that means that our population is going to continue to grow, which means that we are going to need more space and we are a predator and we have to have ways to cultivate our food, right? Or you have to manage human populations to reduce that urban sprawl. And I don't see any way around it. So what other things just um, by nature keep it to where predator species can't be too close together?
Yeah, I think well you hit a nail on the head, like competition, right? Like I think in innately we are predators, and so we're not that different when we're out hunting than a grizzly bear or a wolf or a mountain lion. We're out pursuing our prey. They interact with each other on the landscape. We don't often see it, but you know, it's the same interaction we have as long as we're here and as long as we want to go do the things we want to do. There's going to be conflict. Like you're not going to get it down to zero. And we can coexist. I would say in most areas we do coexist fine. Like I think there's enough respect by people for wildlife to allow it. Um, but I think there's just going to be a point like we are spreading out to so much that to be able to do that we need more space, and we're just encroaching so much. And then as we manage wildlife, it's all one thing to manage it and be like, okay, we took out X amount for hunting, maybe they won't cause a problem, but it's the space they need, right? Like if we keep taking space at a greater rate than we're limiting the population, it's just going to keep being an issue. And so I think, it's frustrating, but you see these grand big tracts of land being developed. What used to live there and what thinks it still can live there, and then that's when we have conflict, whether it's deer, elk. Conflict isn't just with predators. You look at the damage that wildlife does to crops and to yards and everything like that, and people are hitting them in their dang cars and they're in your town, and it's like, it's not just bears.
Yeah.
It's a whole thing.
Well, I mean, we had that gal that got whacked right there in Ovando, and literally right on the edge of town.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So they are going to encroach into our areas as we are encroaching into their areas. So, I don't see there's got to be a way. Well, number one, we have to have more education on how to deal with those bears
That's a big
because
one.
we all see the Turons and stuff like that over there in Yellowstone National Park. Dude
Mm-hmm.
was just freaking gored by, I don't know, what was he trying to pet a bison or something? I don't know what the heck he was doing or what he was thinking. But every single year we've got human wildlife conflicts like that. And so, in my mind, education around how to deal with these animals, all predator species, and I would just say animals in general, there needs to be a big push for it if we're
Mm-hmm.
going to coexist in any sort of way, right?
Yeah.
And the answer can't just be, well, kill the bear or kill the
No,
lion or the wolf, right?
I'm so with you on that, because to me, I don't think a lot of times our wildlife should pay for our mistakes, right? Like if you live in an area where there's food storage orders and you don't put your garbage or your barbecue away because that's what we're telling you to do. That's a law. And
Mm-hmm.
you deny that and you say I'm not going to do it, and then a grizzly bear comes down and gets in your garbage and you habituate a bear, and the bear's going to get killed, not you. So like the problem, like I said, is like we just have people that don't care enough about the wildlife too. Like I care about the wildlife. I'm a hunter, but I don't want to see a bear have to pay for the I guess the ego of humans, and a lot of times that's what it is. If you've gone through the park, I'm sure there are more signs than you can count about on your pamphlet. Don't approach the wildlife, don't do this, and they're trying. People just do not pay attention anymore. They know better. Everyone knows better than everyone else. And we went through this messaging thing for a lot of years. Like how to recreate in bear country, how to just live in bear country, and it's just like, man, we're doing magnets and VRBOs for people because that's where you have problems. And they just are so naive. They just don't think it's an issue. I think the education piece is great. I think there's just a huge part of our society that just is like, they're dumb. I mean, that's plain and simple.
Do you think there needs to be, harsher punishments for something like that? Because,
Yes.
I mean, I freaking see it. I mean, you're from Butte, so I know you freaking saw it all the time. These videos coming out, people going up and they're standing 5 feet from a bull elk. And
Oh, yeah.
yeah, sure, we love those encounters, right? When we're out hunting and stuff like that. And I don't think I've ever heard of anybody personally that was hunting get gored, but um, we love those encounters. And just because people don't normally get gored doesn't mean that those elk won't gore you.
Yep.
Or, is there,
Well,
how
I
do
think the
we,
punishment thing, I think there needs to be more accountability, and how to do that is going to be through, you know, and that's another big sticking point with people is you're not going to give me more laws. I am not changing what I'm doing because of a wild animal. And I hear that a lot. And I believe me, I've gotten that point sometimes. Like there's a couple trails around here they've closed because of grizzly bear use. I'm like, that's BS. I
yep.
can go on that trail if I want, and so we have that mindset too. So if we come out and say, if you don't put your garbage away, that's an X amount of fine and you're going to lose this. And they're going to have some people who be like, okay, I got to do that. And you're going to have some people that it's like, I'm not doing it. You're not going to tell me. And then it takes one bear.
Well, how does that work with the food storage orders and stuff like that? I suppose I should probably ask a game warden, but if you're out hunting and stuff like that, how are you going to bring a bear box with you? Or I saw a thing on the app
Yeah.
trail where you have to have a bear box, and I'm like, how the hell are you going to have a bear box when you're
So it
hiking the
depends
app
on,
trail?
the forest you're on too. Um, some of them have laws on how far your meat has to be away from your camp, and you have to hang food, and they have those laws in place. And, you know, that's why I think we see less issues. Sadly, we see more issues with bears in towns and garbages and in kind of the fringe habitat than we see with dang people 20 miles in the back country that are knowledgeable about what they're doing. They're like, I'm in bear country. I'm not going to have my ham sandwich in my tent with me. I'm going to hang it over in a tree a couple hundred yards away. So there's a bunch of us that kind of get it, but there's a whole bunch of people that are just like, wait, a bear can be in my garbage? I live on the edge of the national forest. Yeah, I have a
Yep.
Forest Service cabin, and it ripped a hole through the wall. It's like, yeah, I can see that.
Well,
you know?
in Missoula, so I went to school at U of M. It was like I used my VA to go back to school, and it was
Oh
like
yeah,
every freaking day, almost at least every week, we
yeah,
were getting a text message or an email saying, "Hey, bear on campus," you know, and it's like even on campus,
hmm,
you're in that area is pretty damn busy, so
oh
if you're
yeah,
getting a bear on campus, then and then you're hiking the M trail is like right there, then you probably should know that you need to be careful, you
for
know?
sure. And I think a big thing is realizing now, and the money is a big problem. Why we haven't achieved this is, I think if the infrastructure is built out greater, to allow for people to easily kind of buy into this conflict management thing. Like it's one thing to give a homeowner a bear proof garbage can that they can use. And it's a whole nother thing to tell them they have to buy one. And so I think if we had some more resources to be able to be like, and you see it in some like up at Georgetown in certain areas, and we have a bunch around here where it's like that community is part of the Bearwise community, and they're getting garbage cans to keep bears out of trouble, because any bear that gets in trouble is probably going to get killed. And so if we had, that's why I say the infrastructure needs to be built out, and not as much in the core of where it started, but on the periphery now, like on the edges where we don't have any, like you can go into a whole community, like Red Lodge is crazy how many bear problems they have up there, and
Yeah.
so, they have
Yeah.
got it on their mind, like you got to have a bear proof garbage can, and you have to do this. And if you have chickens, you better have a damn electric fence. And if you have an orchard, I think we need to have more opportunity for people to say yes to helping solve the problem. And I'm just like anyone else. If you tell me I have to do something, I get a little butthurt about it, and especially if I got to spend money to do it. So if we could create some more programs that allow for people to be a part of the solution, I think we'll see less conflict. But it is a giant undertaking, to try and figure out. You just got to pick areas where you have high conflict and say, okay, we got to do a program here, and we got to do this, and we got to get apple orchards, electrified. And even then you're not solving it 100%, but you are contributing to the solution of keeping bears and wildlife wild, and your property and you safe. It's got to be a mutual thing for people and wildlife. I'd rather see that than us out just killing everything because they cause problems.
So just a couple more things, because we're running it over an hour now. But one, what is the American Bear Foundation that you guys are running? And then two, what can people do to have their voices heard about getting the bears delisted, or even having their commentary put out there for having Grizzlies delisted, stayed on there, whatever. Personally, I think it needs to be delisted, but if I've got people listening, I just want your voice to be heard, right?
Mm-hmm.
So where can people go to have their voices heard? And also, what is the Bear Foundation that you got?
Yeah, so the first one, the Bear Foundation, basically was just kind of like a weird passion project of mine. Started in 07, and it really stemmed from our conversation today. When I moved to Wyoming, I had grown up hunting in Montana and bear hunted around Butte and all that country. And, I moved to Wyoming, and bears were my thing. And I really was just like, my goodness, man, I don't know what is going on, but all I see are grizzly bears and no black bears. And I was super naive. I was like, yeah, there's grizzly bears around. But I'm thinking of like the 1970s numbers versus the early 2000s numbers of grizzlies. And I mean, it was an alarming and really eye-opening, couple first years. And so part of it was, for me, was like, we don't, you'd ask around and no one knew much about what's going on with the black bears in some of these areas. And then I started asking people that hunt in other grizzly areas, not necessarily in Wyoming, but Idaho and Montana. And yeah, we don't see many, and I got to think they're killing them, and a lot of anecdotal stuff. And I was like, I wish there was someone that would like push for research, and that's kind of how we started. And also at the same time, we were seeing some issues in states that were like attacking bear hunting. And I just saw it in my head. I'm like, if I ever lost the opportunity to bear hunt, I would die. Like it's my favorite thing. And so, looked around, there's like, there's no bear hunting organization really. And there's no organization just for bears in the US. And I thought, I'm looking at, kind of the giants of conservation, and RMEF and mule deer, and like what they did and why they started. And we were much the same. And so we are a nonprofit, have gone through a couple name changes, but more recently we became the American Bear Foundation, because now we operate through the United States. And our goal is to ensure a future for bears and bear hunting. That double-edged sword of like, yes, we want bears on the landscape and we want hunting. And that's a hard thing for people that don't hunt to understand, but they're all together. Right. And so most bear hunters are just like bear freaks. They just love them. Like I could just go watch bears, and most of bear hunters that are hardcore bear hunters are the same way.
Oh, they're a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah. We want to see bears on the landscape. We're not into eradicating a species. Even the grizzly bear, like I love seeing them. I just get frustrated when there's too many, you know? So
Yeah.
it's like, we wanted to be an organization for bears and bear hunters, be a voice for bears. They don't have one, and be a voice for bear hunters. And we've been going for, 2007 to now. So for quite a few years, we're all volunteer. And so I kind of am the chief volunteer, I say, I just kind of try and get every of the pieces right. And we do a lot of projects for conflict mitigation. I think that's a big part of our spend is through mitigating conflict, whether it's fences, garbage, education, bear spray giveaways, and then we do a ton of hunter advocacy stuff. Um, we have gotten to be respected enough by a lot of state agencies to be able to get into some of the studies and to promote some of the studies. And we've done some great studies with the University of Wyoming and the Wyoming Game and Fish here on black bears, which is really cool. And working on getting those studies built out into other states and locations. And so, we got a chapter in Virginia, a chapter in Missouri. So it's kind of like, the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation for bears and bear hunters pretty much. And,
Nice.
and to transition into your next question, that was another big reason we wanted to be involved and do this was because for the most part, like people don't know how to get their voice out there about things. Like they're frustrated or like, this is a great thing. Who do I tell? And it's like, well, I don't know. Like bears don't, and a lot of this federal stuff is really hard to navigate. And so we always just tell people like, once you become a member or you get kind of on our radar, like we send out email blasts. So like anything related to bears and bear hunting in the United States, we're trying to notify you. So if there's a commission meeting, a meeting on grizzly bears, a meeting in a town about, like conflict mitigation, like we're trying to keep that all on our radar so we can get it out to the appropriate people so they can make a presence and have their voice heard. Sometimes it feels like no one's listening, but it dang sure feels good to put your opinion down or go talk to someone about it. And, we have a lot of connections with who to talk to and everything. And so, on the grizzly bear side of things, even people in the West are so naive to it. Like I've taken a few people hunting down here and they're like, dude, I had no idea. I knew you had grizzly bears, but like, this is a different world. Like this is nothing like they ever thought. And I'm like, more people need to see that and experience it. And I mean, even people out West like that hunt and they're just like, holy crap, dude, you got a lot of grizzly bears. And so it's like just bringing people, educating people, talking to them, and just keeping an open mind about it too. Not everyone's going to have the same beliefs as we do. And I'm cool with that. Like, that's what makes us great. But, we're trying to just kind of be a science-based voice for bears and bear hunting and grizzly bears are a big part of it. So,
Yeah. So how was it that you were saying that people can have their voice heard then? Like, is
yeah. So
there certain,
one of the easiest things is to like, you either get involved with us or Howl for Wildlife. So we have a membership package and they do too. I know once you get involved with our two organizations, like anything bear related, we're gonna spit it out to you and tell you like how to do. I'm gonna send you an email and be like, hey, you can comment online here. Click the link, go to the link and comment. Or there is a meeting here, public's invited. You can go listen to the Interagency Grizzly Bear Committee meetings and educate yourself. Listen to what's going on in those meetings. Like we don't have enough hunter representation at those meetings. And so I think that's a big thing and how you can get involved, but also like trying to follow the federal agencies and understanding what's going on. There's just too many people out there that are like, someone's going to take care of it for me. Like you are going to have to take care of it for yourself. Like no one's coming to save you. And if we all don't unite kind of on this same front of, taking responsibility for what we love to do, it's not just going out hunting. You got to do some stuff on the back end too, to make sure you can keep doing it.
Absolutely. Well, you got any closing thoughts?
No, man, I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah.
I could go so long on grizzly bear stuff. I mean, but I appreciate you having us on and helping us get the message out.
Yeah. Thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it.
You betcha.